Good evening, and thank you for joining us. Tonight we open with a developing story that has captured international attention and raised a growing list of questions from investigators, maritime officials, and world leaders. New developments continue to emerge surrounding the dramatic boat strike incident that occurred earlier this week, an event that is now being re-examined in light of newly declassified surveillance footage, advanced thermal imaging data, communication logs, satellite records, and eyewitness testimony. Over the next several minutes we will take you through everything we know so far, what experts are concluding, where the investigation stands, and what unanswered questions still remain in this unfolding situation. The incident occurred at approximately 12:03 local time, in a maritime zone designated as restricted due to ongoing military and commercial operations. Officials initially believed the collision resulted from human error or a simple navigational oversight. However, newly released video footage, captured by both infrared and surface-level surveillance systems, suggests that the vessel's behavior in the final minutes before the strike was anything but ordinary. According to defense analysts, the vessel entered the restricted zone at a shallow angle, moving at a steady pace before gradually increasing speed. At 12 hours 2 minutes and 14 seconds, just under a minute before the collision, the boat's thermal signature changed significantly. This shift has led investigators to consider whether the vessel was experiencing mechanical stress, overheating, or possibly carrying materials that generated excess heat when exposed. That thermal change is currently one of the central mysteries behind the incident. Maritime authorities issued several warnings to the vessel, 3 radio calls, 2 high-intensity light signals, and an acoustic siren, yet no response was received. Investigators reviewing the communication logs confirmed that all warnings were sent in accordance with international maritime protocol. Still, questions remain. Why didn't the vessel slow down? Why did the operator fail to respond? And what caused the boat to make a sharp and sudden turn only seconds before impact? Newly declassified infrared footage shows that abrupt maneuver clearly. The boat appears to shift its trajectory by several degrees, almost as though the operator attempted to steer away from the restricted path. But the change came far too late. At 12 hours 3 minutes and 7 seconds, the vessel made contact, resulting in a bright flash on the thermal camera followed by debris scattering across the water. Experts analyzing the footage frame by frame report that the explosion pattern is consistent with a sudden release of pressure, possibly from internal fuel tanks rupturing due to impact forces. Investigators are now exploring 3 primary scenarios. The first is the possibility of a navigational error. Malfunctioning GPS systems have been reported in the region before, due to both natural interference and electronic jamming. If the vessel's guidance system failed, the operator may not have realized they had entered restricted waters. However, this theory conflicts with the vessel's gradual acceleration, which would normally suggest conscious control. The second scenario involves deliberate movement. Intelligence agencies have seen similar patterns in past reconnaissance attempts, where small, fast-moving vessels entered secure waters to test response times or gather observational data. Although there is no concrete evidence that this vessel was conducting such an operation, the combination of irregular acceleration, sharp maneuvering, and failure to respond to warnings has kept this possibility open. The third scenario involves mechanical failure. If the vessel's steering system malfunctioned, any attempt to correct course may have been delayed or impaired. The sudden trajectory shift could have been a last-second effort by the operator to regain control. Mechanical specialists are currently analyzing recovered debris to determine whether engine failure or steering linkage disruption occurred. Witnesses who were in the area at the time of the incident have provided additional insight. Fishermen working nearby reported hearing sirens echoing across the water. Some stated that the boat appeared to be moving too fast, almost as if the operator had lost control. One eyewitness described seeing what looked like a brief spark or flash inside the vessel before the final impact, a detail investigators are treating with caution but not dismissing. Shoreline residents described feeling the tremor of the explosion, with windows shaking from the shockwave and seagulls scattering in alarm. Military officials issued a statement confirming that all standard defensive measures were followed and emphasizing that the priority was preventing potential harm to other ships, coastal installations, and civilian workers. Human rights organizations, meanwhile, have requested independent oversight to ensure that the response was proportionate and that additional non-lethal interventions could not have prevented the incident. Legal experts are divided on whether international maritime law supports the actions taken, though most acknowledge that ignoring multiple warnings places significant responsibility on the vessel entering the zone. International reaction has been swift. Several nations expressed concern over the rising militarization of strategic waterways, warning that heightened tensions increase the likelihood of accidents and misunderstandings. Shipping companies are monitoring the situation closely, as the affected region is a critical corridor for global trade. Even a brief disruption can affect supply chains, fuel transport routes, and insurance premiums, with costs ultimately impacting markets worldwide. In response to these concerns, maritime unions have called for clearer communication procedures, citing instances in which vessels entering contested waters received outdated or mismatched navigational data. They argue that better coordination between military and civilian authorities is essential to prevent incidents like this from recurring. As the investigation continues, officials are analyzing multiple forms of data. Satellite imagery taken minutes before the incident may reveal whether the vessel was drifting or actively navigating. Audio recordings from the restricted zone's monitoring stations are being reviewed for anomalies. Recovered fragments are undergoing chemical testing to identify traces of accelerants or internal fuel reactions. Engineers are reconstructing possible mechanical failure scenarios using simulation software to determine whether the vessel's systems could have malfunctioned at the worst possible moment. Intelligence analysts are also examining whether the vessel's route matches any known smuggling or unauthorized surveillance patterns. This doesn't confirm wrongdoing but helps determine whether the movement aligns with typical civilian behavior. Early assessments show inconsistencies with standard fishing or transport routes. One of the major questions investigators hope to answer is why the vessel's operator did not respond to repeated radio calls. Interference, equipment failure, panic, or loss of consciousness remain possibilities. Forensic examination of the communication equipment recovered from the wreckage may shed light on this mystery. Officials have stated that a preliminary report may be issued soon, but a comprehensive, fully detailed report will take weeks. It is expected to include a full timeline reconstruction, communication transcript, technical analysis, thermal signature interpretation, satellite correlation, and the final impact model. What remains certain is that tonight's newly released details challenge the simple narrative offered in the early hours after the incident. Instead, they reveal a complex sequence of events shaped by technology, human decision-making, and possibly mechanical failure. Why the vessel accelerated, how the thermal signature changed, what caused the last-second maneuver, and whether the collision could have been avoided are questions the world is watching closely. We will continue monitoring the investigation as more information emerges. For now, this is the latest on the developing story of the boat strike incident. More updates are expected as authorities release additional material. For World News Tonight, I'm David Muir.